recording started. I have the massive audience of Diego. So Genesis 9. I'm gonna start off by actually reading the Noahide laws, and we'll talk about them afterwards. But I want to read these first so that to to see if you can associate them with what's going on in this story. So the Noahide laws: not one, not to worship idols; two, not to curse God; three, not to commit murder; four, not to commit adultery or sexual immorality; five, not to steal, and you can include kidnapping with that; six, do not eat flesh torn from a living animal; and seven, to establish courts of justice. Okay. Genesis 9. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every morning, every morning, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is in its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from every man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you be fruitful and multiply. Increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I will establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is a sign of the covenant that I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you, for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Now Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both of their shoulders, and walked backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. He also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So there's a lot to cover in all of this. And I'm obviously not going to get to all of it. And I don't have too many people here that I can bounce stuff off of. So, so let's start off with the idea of the Noahide laws. So in Jewish thinking, and as far as I can tell, this seems to be sort of a more modern understanding in Judaism. They have this idea that if you are not Jewish, because Jews don't believe in really proselytizing or evangelizing to non-Jews. And so it seems like they've come up with this system where they say, okay, if you're not Jewish, in order for you to get to heaven or have heaven to be pleasant, depending upon which Jewish person is talking to you and what their conception of the afterlife is, they'll basically say, in order to be saved, more or less, the thing that you need to do is you need to follow the Noahide laws. And so the Noahide laws are basically rules that people have tried to glean from the passage that we just read, but also kind of the surrounding text as well. Like there's some stuff that seems to be kind of related even to the stuff with, like, starting with Adam, and including like the Cain and Abel, right? Because like there's but and like because clearly like there's some rules given here, but they're not they're not they're not like codified as well as what people would have there. And so I guess for me, what I want to say is that I'm not fully convinced that the Noahide laws are a thing biblically, but I do agree that there is a covenant that is being made here because, well, it says the word covenant. And it is interesting that it's not just a covenant with all of humanity, it's a covenant with the earth and all of creation upon the earth. And so we're going to talk about this more a little bit when we get down lower. But to me, I think that this really kind of calls into question, or I think is really important data, and one of the ongoing arguments that people have about what's called replacement theology. And it's this idea of like, did the church replace Israel? And to like, it seems from what I can gather, it seems like your opinion on that is going to be kind of based off of what does it mean to be in covenant relationship with God. But so let's get to the actual text and go in order. Okay, so I want to kind of highlight the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens. So one of the things that I want to highlight this is kind of a similar thing to what I said about. So if you remember, I said that this is kind of this is a bit of a redo of it's a bit of a redo of the creation story, right? And it include and so with that, in the creation story, and especially in the curse, I mentioned it um in that section with the curse. I kind of made the point that I was like, it's not clear as to whether the things that are being said are a new thing that's occurring, or is it just trying to explain the current situation, right? I described it as, right, because like in relationship to like the whole like you need to work for food. It's like, okay, was it never true that they needed to work for food, or was it just that now that they're no longer in like under God's protection, that and there's that kind of a change that the thing that was always true is like more true. Um, and I'm still going to kind of argue that that is what's happening here, right? Um, and I think it should be somewhat obvious as to why that is. So, if you start off right, and if we go like kind of verse by verse, the be fruitful and multiply and fill the whole earth. Okay, that was a command that was already given to mankind. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of heaven. So, if I was to read this like I, some kind of wooden literalist would, you would end up kind of imagining that, oh, this is a new thing and this didn't apply before, right? Um, and so the like before Noah's Ark, animals were just cozying up to everybody, and there were no issues. Like animals and humans were just buddy buddy prior to the flood. I have a hard time believing that. I have a hard time believing that that is a new thing that is just being instantiated um, right after the flood. Um, and now that kind of goes along with the um, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Right? So there's this idea that some people will have, and this includes both old and new creationists. So like young Earth creationists and old Earth creationists. So like I've even seen like Hugh Ross argue that this verse implies that, well, prior to Noah's flood, everyone was vegetarian, and then afterwards, people started eating meat. Um, and again, I just don't think it it means that. I think it's describing something that's already true. Now, this next one should really help me with this, right? Um, uh, so from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of a man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. So, right, we have this idea of like outlawing murder, and like there's a justice system. But that was actually already true, right? That was already true with the story of Cain and Abel. And so, like, this portion about, requiring like payment for bloodshed, uh, that was already an existing requirement. And so I don't see why that would be a new thing. Um, it's not like people weren't murdering, right? It's not like people weren't murdering prior to this. Um, it's trying to um, establish rules for how to regulate life. And because of that, I think it also should be seen as it should be viewed in light of what the Jews are going to end up thinking about the law in general. And one of the things that Jews are going to end up thinking about the law in general is that the law is a good gift given by God to structure like their lives. And so it kind of makes sense that they would think that God also did that in a general sense for the rest of creation, for all the other humans, right? Um, and so I think that this kind of rule here about you can kind of eat everything, right? And that becomes the rule in the Noahide law, not to eat flesh torn from a living animal. And so they interpret this passage as you can eat everything, you don't have to keep kosher, right? But don't go too far with it to where you're literally ripping um body parts off of animals, and like I guess the idea is also that like you're eating animals alive, which is why if you watch the Russell Crowe Noah movie, he is um, there's a scene where I'm pretty sure they like the people that are being taken out by the flood are um, they're eating like a live lamb. Sorry, I got a text. I don't know who I'm saying sorry to. Um, okay. Okay. Yeah. So now I want to jump down to here. Okay. So who is God establishing this covenant with? With you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the livestock, and every beast of the earth that is with you, as many came out of the ark. And I will establish. Where's the part? Uh, ah, for all future generations. Okay, so now's the part that I want to talk about replacement theology. So, um, there's a common, well, I don't know if it's common, but there's a growing argument that's being made, in Christian circles about how should we think about um, Israel, both in the past and currently in modern day Israel, and their relationship to um, Christians. And more and more, I'm hearing people argue for what's called replacement theology. And so it's this idea that at one point in time, Israel, uh, that this people group was God's chosen people, and then Jesus came, and they rejected Jesus, um, and so I believe I even saw a debate where one of the Finocchio brothers argued that when the day Jesus died was the day that Judaism ended. And then the day that Jesus rose was the day that Christianity began, um, which is a very silly argument, and I have lots of problems with it. But that's kind of the idea, is that because of the Jews' rejection of Jesus, that Judaism is done and God is done with the Jews, and um, it's all about Christians now. And so all of the promises that were given to the Jews are now given to the Christians. And part of this, I think I think the best, so there is a verse I should have looked at it before. Okay, covenant there we go. It's obsolete. All right, so there's a verse in Hebrews. That says, by calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. Okay, so people will use this verse to say that, hey, look, the old covenant is gone, and we have the new covenant, and so now that's the only one that matters. And I have a big problem with this because it assumes that there's only one covenant. And because it assumes that there's only one covenant, therefore, this verse that is talking about replacing an old covenant must be referring to that one old covenant, because there was only one covenant. And the problem is that there is not just one covenant in the Bible, or even in Genesis. There's multiple, especially depending upon how you count them. In Genesis alone, there's very clearly at least two covenants, possibly three. And I would actually argue that there's probably three. And the reason why I would argue that is because I think that even whenever covenants are similar, and they might have similar stipulations, I would argue that they actually are different covenants. I think it's possible to have multiple types of covenants with the same person. And so I'll try and give an example of this. So like again, so like imagine you have like a kid, right? And you say, hey, you need to start pulling your own weight around here. You need to get a job. You need to make money, and you need to start paying a portion of the rent, and um, and all that stuff, right? That could be argued is one type of a covenant, right? But let's say that, you know, um, let's say the kid does get a job or whatever and is working really hard, but their car breaks down, and so they have to use up their money to repair the car or whatever, and so they don't have money to pay you rent that month or whatever. And so you tell them, hey, you're my son. I love you, and I love you unconditionally. You don't actually have to like pay the rent this month. or whatever, right? That is a different covenant, right? Those are different rules that you have with the same person, and they have related outcomes, right? But one is based off of one thing and another is based off of another thing. Does that mean that like one supersedes the other, one's more important? Like, no, I would actually argue that they work together in multiple ways. I think that that's what's going on with the Abraham covenant, and when we get to those chapters, we'll talk about those. But to apply it for what's going on right here in this chapter, I basically never hear anyone arguing that um, the thing that Jesus came to fulfill uh, was to fulfill this Noahide, Noetic, I don't know, this Noah based this flood covenant, right? Um, it's pretty much all related to uh, the Sinai covenant. That being said, uh, I think it's interesting that you do have this line here where it says, "From his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of a man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." One, so I do this thing where whenever I have kind of a hard like philosophical question or issue, I sort of just um like put it in the back of my mind and don't deal with it right then and there. I just kind of think about it. And then once I have an answer, I go, "Oh, cool! I have an answer to that thing." And then I usually try to get a different question that I ended up thinking about for a while. And so one of the questions that I've thought about for a while is um, probably one of the best. I think it's one of the more forceful arguments, not in favor of like, it's not in favor of atheism, but it's sort of in favor of uh, the kind of unfairness of life. Uh, is this idea that like you didn't choose to be born, um, and there's multiple ways to deal with that, and I have other ways of dealing with that question. But I think one thought that question brings up in me whenever people posit this idea that it's unfair to be born is that I don't really think that it's necessarily unfair to be born. I think most people think that it's unfair um, to have existence and then have some kind of negative um, eternal thing happen afterwards, or to just have a bad um, existence. And basically, people then use that as a way to kind of blame God, right? And so you sort of blame God for existence. Um, I think you see a lot of that kind of. I mean, obviously, like in different like school shooter manifestos and other things like this. When people have this like nihilism, right? They want to blame God, and then even if you look at someone like an Alex O'Connor or whatever, like it kind of these different atheist types where they'll be like, how can God command genocide and do all these different things? And so you sort of have, for me at least, I have this idea that like, well, kind of at the end of the day, the thing everybody's mad about is the fact that God is bringing everybody into the world and he's killing them. Um, and so, is there a way that he makes up for that? Um, and in some ways, the story of Jesus, I think, is kind of fulfilling this little section, right? Um, From his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of a man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Um, and so you can kind of make an argument that, or at least I have this thought, at least, that something that might be going on is God kind of, with the story of Christ, is God kind of abiding by this general principle that he instantiated, that he is bringing people into the world, and he is um, taking their life, and uh, and so he came into the world so that other men could take his life, so that he could pay for that reckoning. I think that might be what's going on. I also think it's related, because this portion talks about blood and blood's relationship to life. Um, and I've mentioned before, I don't know if I have in this series, so I'll say it now. Ancient writers are empiricists. They write things based off of what they see. And so it should be pretty obvious as to why blood is related to life, because whenever all of the blood goes out of somebody, they stop being alive. Um, uh, and I also think that this can help us a little bit with a completely other side topic. Well, not completely other side topic, but a question that Christian asked me the other day whenever he's talking about the definition of death. And we'll go over this more whenever I do my mini series on hell. But I think a good rule of thumb is that the definition of death should be the opposite definition of life. And so the definition of life should have something to do with activity, and being able to move, right? Because whenever you lose the blood, you stop moving, you stop having activity, and so you stop having the life. And so life has to do with movement. This is the time where normally I don't know if you have anything that you want to say about all of that junk, Diego. No, he's just vacuuming. All right. So I kind of got off on a tangent a little bit with with the with the covenant stuff, and I want to just make sure that I complete that thought process here. I think that God, whenever God says for all future generations, he means that that is a covenant that is established for all future generations. Um, and so I do think that this is a generic covenant, that is based off of the whole earth. Um, and but I don't think that it has anything to do with spiritual salvation, like what a modern Jew tries to argue. Um, because there's nothing in here that talks about a spiritual salvation. What this is talking about is general justice. That that's what this is talking about. And so I think the thing that you should get from this is this idea that shows up in other places in the Bible, that if you do not preserve a general sense of justice, and you just let people go crazy and let there be violence throughout the land, like there was in the chapters before Genesis, or Genesis 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, or whatever, um, then I think you will get a flood, right? But it won't be a flood to destroy all flesh. I think you will get little floods, right? And as we go on in Genesis, there will be little floods, right? The Sodom and Gomorrah story is a little flood, right? The Assyrians coming to to capture your people and take them into exile is a little flood, right? There are other um, types of things that God will use, and part of the rationale behind them is going to be related to this idea of you are not preserving um, either general justice, which is what this is talking about, or specific justice, which is what the Sinai Covenant is talking about. Okay. Bow in the sky. The bow in the sky is a bow like a bow and arrow, right? It is not a bow like a hair bow. It is a weapon of war. And this is a warrior putting his gun up on the shelf, right? That's what God setting the rainbow and the clouds is. And it's also interesting that it acts as a memorial, and it acts as a memorial for God, right? And remember, in a similar vein to what we talked about last time, I don't think that memorial is because God forgets. I think that memorial is because it is the thing that connects. It is the thing that connects time, right? And so, um, and it also connects people, right? So the idea should be that not just when there's a rainbow that God is remembering these things, but when you see a rainbow, you should be realizing that God is remembering what happened before, right? And so the memorial acts in a way that it connects you with God, and it connects you with the history of the world, right? Um, uh, let's do the second section. So, this section is kind of Noah's fall, right? And to me, I think it's interesting. It's interesting how much connections to Adam. Um, so Noah began to be a man of the soil. So whenever it says soil there, it is Adama, right? The land, right? And so he became a man, and Ish. He became an Ish of the Adama, and so after this new creation, Noah starts to take this kind of um, he starts to take this kind of Adam-like role, right? Um, and in some ways, you can you can see why right people had this idea that Adam was sort of acting as this like priest-like character, um, and so you could start to understand why people are thinking that Noah is kind of acting like that too. Um, and so this is why you'll hear Muslims say something that I always think is like a funny line whenever they'll say like, "Oh, we believe in all of the prophets: Adam, Noah, Jesus," and it's like, wait a minute, like a few of those were not prophets, right? Um, but there is kind of this. I do agree that that idea is sort of there, lurking in the background. Um, but so Noah becomes like Adam. He plants a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and became drunk, and he laid uncovered in his tent. Okay, so and then Ham sees him naked. So there's a lot of debate about what this means that Ham saw the nakedness of his father. I can actually link you to one with Jonathan Peugeot, where he's discussing this, and in there they discuss the idea that um, because there is a passage in Leviticus that says, um, do not lay with the wife of your father, because her nakedness is the nakedness of your father. He just as a straight like implant, not Jonathan, but it's a it's a it's an Eastern Orthodox priest, um, and he just takes like a straight implant and he goes, oh, well, so that's what's going. He argues that that's what's going on in this story, and he's not the only one that I've ever heard argue that. That what's going on here is that Ham is actually sleeping with like his mother, and that's the thing that Ham does that's so bad that causes him to be cursed. There's also an argument that Ham is doing something sexual to his father. Those are all possibilities. The problem that I have with that is I think that if either one of those things are what is supposed to be going on, the reaction actually seems kind of tame. um, uh, I think that if the reaction is that, because one of the things that to be noted here is that nothing actually happens to Ham. Ham actually isn't cursed. It's his son Canaan is cursed, and like Canaan's not even Ham's only son. Like Ham has multiple children, but it's just like one particular child is cursed. Um, and so it seems to me, I think it's and also to me that's a weird kind of story because then I actually don't understand how the drunkenness is connected to it. Like it because it says that Noah was drunk, and so like how does the drunkenness relate if it, if we're talking about different people here in what's actually occurring with Ham? Um, and to me, I actually think that kind of the point of the story is that actually the thing that Ham does is supposed to actually be seen as not a huge deal. I, I think thematically what's actually going on here is that um uh I think that this story actually has to do with maturity, kind of similar to what I was talking about with um maturity whenever beforehand, right? I think Ham is being immature here. I don't think so if you go like watch that podcast, he tries to make the argument that Ham is trying to like usurp Noah here, and I don't think that that's what's happening. I think that Ham is being immature, and Ham's immaturity is being contrasted with Sham and Japheth's, um, with their maturity. Um, and so a couple of other ideas. Um, yeah, I'll just wrap. So the nakedness of your father, in my opinion, um, should be thought of as related to the sins of your father, um, and not just the sins of your father, but like the things that your father and your ancestors did uh, to get by and to deal with the difficulties that they had going on in their time periods. And you are not supposed to do um, the thing that's very common for all modern people to do, which is to say, "Oh, I'm very modern. I do things better than the way that the people in the past did it." Um, and kind of in the same thing where I talked about that this story is sort of talking about time and about in some ways it's like an instantiation of the beginning of time. uh I think that this little story here at the end for Noah is about what is a proper and mature relationship with time. um and I think that's really related to this idea of walking backwards. um there's a line in a Matisyahu song where he says, like, we are walking backwards into the future. And apparently that's like a I looked it up. It's apparently a quote, or it's like a proverb. It's a Maui proverb or something. So it's not like a Jewish proverb. Um, but I think that idea is still related here, right? And it's that, like, we go into the future, but we can't see the future. All we can really see is the past. Um, and in here they're walking towards their past, right? They're walking backwards towards their father, because their father is their past. And so um, there's a relationship there's an interesting kind of circular relationship there, where, like, um, you need to show grace to your past, while also the fact that you're not staring at it, me it like is also the recognition that the past does have problems, right? Like, you're doing you're it both, like, with that same action you're acknowledging, like, you need to try and acknowledge the past and respect the past. And that has to me, I think that this also has to somewhat relate to this idea of a memorial, right? um and I think that that's actually kind of important for Protestants to remember too, right? Because Protestants have this thing where we want to say, like, um, everyone before us was wrong, right? Um, and it's funny, there was actually a recent Jonathan Peugeot Universal History podcast where they're talking about American religion, and he brings up this point where um, Protestants, especially in America in particular, have this flavor where they almost always want to say everyone before me was wrong, and they all did things. They all did this religious thing incorrectly, and to me that's a little bit funny. And I was thinking about it, and I commented on their video. I was like, this brings up an interesting question for all the people that are in this new trend of wanting to return to orthodoxy, or um, return to Catholicism. Um, like to say, like that's the right path. Um, the right path is to not say that everybody before me was wrong, and to go back to this ancient tradition. But the thing that's funny to me about that is if you come from a line of Protestants, like I do, right? I'm then put into the camp where if I try to say that, I then have to say, well, all of my recent relatives, like my mom and my grandma, um, that all of them were wrong, right? And so, uh, in this attempt to like find the right religion, uh, I'm going to be forced to end up saying that somebody was wrong. And so, if you're going to do that, I think the mature thing to do is to say, I'm not going to hold right the nakedness of my forefathers. I'm not going to hold their inadequacies against them, and instead, I'm going to acknowledge them and try to walk towards them because I want to go where they're going and where I believe they're at. And I want to do that with as much respect as I can, but also with as much acknowledgement that they probably did some things wrong. And that's okay too. And I think that's kind of the proper way to take what's going on here. That's all I really have that I wanted to say. Do you have anything, Diego? Are your floors vacuumed very well?
No, sir.
All right. Well, hopefully we get more people next week.